The machine said I was unconscious. My family believed I would never wake up. They were wrong about both. And that single mistake ended up costing them everything they thought they were about to inherit. But before I tell you how it all fell apart, you need to understand who I was before a red light changed my life forever. My name is Matt Harris. I'm 58 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought I had built the kind of life most people spend their entire lives chasing. I lived in Pelican Bay, one of the quieter neighborhoods in Naples, Florida. My wife and I owned a beautiful 4-bedroom home on Creighton Road. It wasn't the biggest house in the neighborhood, but every brick in it represented years of hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrifices most people never saw. I wasn't born into money. Nobody handed me a successful business. Back in 2001, I rented a tiny 400-square-foot office on Tamiami Trail North and started Harris Supply Solutions with little more than determination and a desk that wobbled every time someone leaned on it. For years, I worked weekends, holidays, birthdays, whatever it took. There were nights I slept in the office because driving home would have wasted 2 hours I couldn't afford to lose. Slowly, painfully, the company grew. One warehouse became 2. 2 became 3. Clients trusted us. Employees stayed with us. By 2024, we had 47 people on payroll and contracts that kept trucks moving across Southwest Florida every single day. Whenever my accountant smiled during quarterly meetings, I knew we'd done something right. I honestly believed I was building more than a business. I thought I was building security for my family. Turns out, I was building something they were already planning to divide without me. At home, things looked normal. At least from the outside. My wife, Sandra, was 54. We'd been together for 32 years and married for 30. She had been the love of my life. The machine said I was unconscious. My family believed I would never wake up. They were wrong about both. And that single mistake ended up costing them everything they thought they were about to inherit. But before I tell you how it all fell apart, you need to understand who I was before a red light changed my life forever. My name is Matt Harris. I'm 58 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought I had built the kind of life most people spend their entire lives chasing. I lived in Pelican Bay, one of the quieter neighborhoods in Naples, Florida. My wife and I owned a beautiful 4-bedroom home on Creighton Road. It wasn't the biggest house in the neighborhood, but every brick in it represented years of hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrifices most people never saw. I wasn't born into money. Nobody handed me a successful business. Back in 2001, I rented a tiny 400-square-foot office on Tamiami Trail North and started Harris Supply Solutions with little more than determination and a desk that wobbled every time someone leaned on it. For years, I worked weekends, holidays, birthdays, whatever it took. There were nights I slept in the office because driving home would have wasted 2 hours I couldn't afford to lose. Slowly, painfully, the company grew. One warehouse became 2. 2 became 3. Clients trusted us. Employees stayed with us. By 2024, we had 47 people on payroll and contracts that kept trucks moving across Southwest Florida every single day. Whenever my accountant smiled during quarterly meetings, I knew we'd done something right. I honestly believed I was building more than a business. I thought I was building security for my family. Turns out, I was building something they were already planning to divide without me. At home, things looked normal. At least from the outside. My wife, Sandra, was 54. We'd been together for 32 years and married for 30. She had been the love of my life. By evening, I was still in the office dealing with contract renewals. The air conditioning on the 3rd floor had been acting up for weeks. I'd reminded Carl more times than I could count to get someone out there to fix it. Every time. He promised he would. Every time. Nothing happened. Funny the little details you remember later. The things that seem completely meaningless until they're attached to the worst day of your life. Around 9:40 that night, I finally packed up. Locked my office. Walked through the parking lot. Got into my SUV. I remember feeling exhausted. Not unhappy. Just tired. Sandra had texted me. Dinner's in the fridge. Simple. Ordinary. The kind of message married couples send every day without realizing one of them might become the last. I smiled. Started driving home. Traffic was light. The radio was playing quietly. I stopped at a red light on US 41. Glanced at Sandra's text one more time. The light turned green. I eased into the intersection. And then. Nothing. No warning. No screeching tires. No time to react. Just darkness. The kind of darkness that doesn't end when you close your eyes. Because your eyes are already closed. Darkness has a strange way of swallowing time. There was no dream. No peaceful sleep. No bright light waiting at the end of a tunnel. Just, nothing. At least that's what I thought. Eventually, tiny sounds began slipping through that darkness. A steady beep. Air moving through a vent. Rubber soles squeaking across a polished floor. Somewhere nearby, a machine kept repeating the same rhythm over and over, like it was reminding the world I was still hanging on. That's when I realized something terrifying. I wasn't gone. I was still here. I just couldn't move. I tried opening my eyes. Nothing. I tried lifting a finger. Nothing. I tried screaming. My body ignored every command. Imagine being locked inside your own mind while the rest of the world keeps moving without you. That's what it felt like. Later, I learned I had suffered a severe head injury, several broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and internal bleeding. The doctors called it remarkable that I survived. I called it the beginning of the worst week of my life. At some point, I heard a nurse speaking softly. Room 12. ICU, 3rd floor. So now I knew where I was. Naples Community Hospital. I had no idea how many days had passed. Minutes and hours blended together until time stopped meaning anything. Then one morning, I heard footsteps I recognized. Sandra. You spend 30 years married to someone, and you learn the sound of their footsteps without even realizing it. She wasn't alone. Another voice joined her. The doctor. Mrs. Harris, he said calmly, your husband's condition has stabilized. His brain activity is improving, which is encouraging. But we still don't know when he'll regain consciousness. It could be days, possibly longer. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, and if he doesn't wake up? The question itself didn't bother me. It was reasonable. Any spouse would ask. The doctor's voice stayed professional. If there's no significant improvement, we'll discuss long-term care options. We'll evaluate life support decisions if they become necessary. A long silence filled the room. Then Sandra spoke again. Her voice was steady. Almost, too steady. Matt always said he wouldn't want to live attached to machines. My heart pounded. No. I never said that. Not once. If it comes to that, she continued, I'd rather sign whatever paperwork says you don't bring him back. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood her. Surely she didn't mean. The do not resuscitate order, the doctor explained carefully. Yes, Sandra replied. That's the one. Every alarm inside me went off. I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to grab her wrist. I wanted to shout that she was lying. Instead. Nothing. Not even a twitch. Another familiar voice entered the conversation. Carl. Dad always hated the idea of becoming a burden, he said quickly. He told us that years ago. Another lie. A complete lie. My son wasn't remembering my wishes. He was inventing them. The doctor hesitated. I understand this is an emotional decision. Sandra answered without missing a beat. Matt has lived a full life. A full life. Those 3 words hit harder than the pickup truck ever could. 58 years old. 30 years of marriage. Everything I'd built. Everything I'd sacrificed. Reduced to one sentence. He has lived a full life. As though my story had already reached its natural ending. I heard paperwork sliding across a table. Then. A pen clicked. One signature. That was all it took. My wife signed the DNR authorization while I was lying less than 3 feet away. Completely aware. Completely helpless. I can't explain what that felt like. It wasn't fear. Fear would have been easier. It was betrayal. Pure. Cold. Unforgettable betrayal. In that moment, something inside me changed. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. I made myself one promise. If I survived, I wouldn't tell them what I'd heard. I'd let them believe I remembered nothing. Because people who think they're safe always reveal more than people who know they're being watched. That decision would save far more than my life. It would expose every single one of them. And before another 24 hours had passed, I'd hear a conversation that would make the DNR seem like the least painful betrayal of all. The rest of that day passed in silence. Machines hummed. Nurses came and went. Someone adjusted my floor. Someone checked my blood pressure. Every few hours I heard a doctor say I was holding steady. It was strange. The medical staff were fighting to keep me alive. The people I loved most were already talking about life after me. By evening, I heard several voices outside my room. The door opened. More footsteps. More chairs being pulled across the floor. Then the unmistakable sound of a soda can cracking open. Carl. Of course it was Carl. Eva spoke first. He looks exactly the same. Sandra answered quietly. The doctor thinks maybe another week. Eva let out a long sigh. Not the kind that comes from heartbreak. The kind that comes from inconvenience. I've got so much going on, Mom. I can't keep driving over here every couple of days. Her words stung. Not because she was busy. Everyone gets busy. It was the way she said it. Like visiting her father in intensive care had become another annoying item on her calendar. Nobody corrected her. Nobody reminded her that I was still alive. Carl finally shrugged. No one's making you. I know, Eva replied. I'm just saying. Dad was never around when I needed him anyway. The room went quiet. Then she continued. He missed school plays. She paused. He missed dance recitals. Another pause. He always had meetings. There it was. The list every working parent fears hearing one day. And she wasn't entirely wrong. I had missed those things. I remembered sitting in airports wishing I were home. I remembered apologizing. Promising I'd make the next one. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I couldn't. Every hour I spent away from my family had one purpose. To make sure they never had to worry about money. To build something that would outlast me. Ironically, it was that very success that had poisoned everything. Adrian finally spoke. His voice was calm. Professional. Exactly the same voice he'd used during board meetings for years. Matt always believed family comes first. I almost laughed. He was about to weaponize my own values against me. I think the best way to honor him, Adrian continued, is to respect what he would have wanted. Sandra nodded. I agree. Then Carl said something I'll remember until the day I die. Besides. He lowered his voice slightly. Once the estate clears, the trust starts paying out. Silence. Then he chuckled softly. I looked through Dad's files last year. I know what my share is. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. He had gone through my private records. Not because he was worried. Not because he was helping. Because he wanted to know how much money he'd receive when I died. I'm 28, Carl continued. I've been waiting long enough. Sandra immediately whispered. Carl. Not here. Not here. She didn't tell him he was wrong. She didn't tell him to stop talking about his father's inheritance. She only cared that he had chosen the wrong place. That sentence told me everything. The problem wasn't what he believed. The problem was that he'd said it out loud. The conversation drifted to other things. Hospital bills. Insurance paperwork. The house. Who would help Sandra? Ordinary topics. Except nothing about this felt ordinary anymore. After about 20 minutes, Eva left. Carl followed. Sandra stayed behind for a while. She held my hand. Softly. If anyone had walked into the room, they would have seen a devoted wife comforting her unconscious husband. Then she leaned closer. So close I could hear every breath. I'm sorry it happened this way. She whispered it so quietly I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. Then she stood up. And walked away. Those words echoed in my head for hours. I'm sorry it happened this way. What exactly did she mean? Sorry about the accident. Sorry I was suffering. Or. Sorry their plans had become complicated because I refused to die. I didn't have the answer. Not yet. But over the next 4 days. Every visit. Every careless conversation. Every whispered phone call. Would slowly uncover a truth far darker than I ever imagined. And by the time I finally opened my eyes, I already knew I could never trust my family again. The next 4 days changed me forever. Not because my condition got worse. Because every conversation that drifted through that ICU room stripped away another piece of the family I thought I knew. When people believe you can't hear them, they stop pretending. And that's exactly what happened. The nurses still treated me like I mattered. Every morning, someone would check my pupils, adjust my medication, and remind me to keep fighting, even though they had no idea I was already fighting harder than they could imagine. Then visiting hours would begin. And my family would arrive. One afternoon, I heard Carl standing just outside my room. His voice was low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. Yeah, it's only a matter of time. A short pause. No, the doctors don't think he'll be back to normal. Another pause. I'll have liquidity soon. The word hit me like a punch. Liquidity. Not my dad. Not my family. Not we're praying. Liquidity. He was talking about my death as if it were a business transaction. I've been looking at a place in Bonita Springs, he continued. Nice neighborhood. I'll finally have enough for the down payment. He laughed. Actually laughed. I'll call you when everything settles. The call ended. His footsteps faded down the hallway. I lay there completely frozen. For years, I'd worked late nights so Carl would never have to struggle the way I did. I thought I was giving him opportunities. Instead, I'd apparently taught him to wait for an inheritance instead of building a future. The following day, Eva visited alone with Sandra. She didn't stay long. I've been thinking, Eva said. That house is way too big for one person. Sandra didn't answer immediately. You should probably sell it. She spoke so casually it made my stomach twist. You could get a smaller place closer to me. Sandra finally asked. You think so? Absolutely. Eva shrugged. No point hanging on to that place after. She never finished the sentence. She didn't have to. After Dad. After he's gone. After the funeral. After the money. One tiny word carried all of it. I remembered every birthday party we'd hosted in that backyard. Every Thanksgiving. Every Christmas morning. Every graduation dinner. That house wasn't just real estate. It was our life. To them. It had already become an asset waiting to be sold. But the conversation that truly changed everything happened 2 days later. Adrian came by himself. No Sandra. No Carl. No Eva. Just him. He pulled a chair beside my bed. For a few minutes he said nothing. Then his phone rang. He answered immediately. Yeah. A pause. I know. Another pause. No, don't move anything yet. He lowered his voice. The estate needs to settle first. Estate. Not recovery. Not rehabilitation. Estate. I can handle the company. Another pause. I know where everything is. He sounded confident. Too confident. I've already got a transition plan. Transition? What transition? I was still alive. Then he said something that made every instinct in my body scream. The cleaner this is, the better. Cleaner. He wanted my death to be clean. No complications. No recovery. No questions. Just paperwork. After hanging up, he sat quietly beside my bed for another minute. Then he leaned toward me. I'll take care of everything, Matt. His voice almost sounded sincere. Don't worry. He patted my arm. Then walked out. The moment the door closed, I replayed every word in my head. I know where everything is. The cleaner this is. I'll take care of everything. Something wasn't right. I didn't know exactly what. But I knew this much. Adrian wasn't simply preparing for the possibility that I might die. He sounded like someone who had already planned what came next. That night, I made another promise to myself. If I ever opened my eyes again, I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't accuse anyone. I'd smile. I'd thank them. I'd let every one of them believe their performance had worked. Because people hiding secrets make mistakes. And I intended to give them every opportunity to make one. The very next morning. Against every expectation. I opened my eyes. And the look on Sandra's face lasted less than a second. But it told me she wasn't prepared to see me alive. The first thing I saw was a bright hospital light. The second was a nurse dropping the clipboard she was holding. Oh my God. She rushed toward the hallway. Doctor. He's awake. Within seconds, the room filled with people. A doctor leaned over me, shining a small light into my eyes. Mr. Harris, can you hear me? I blinked. It felt like lifting 100 pounds with my eyelids. Good, he said with a smile. Can you squeeze my hand? I did. Not very hard. But enough. The room seemed to breathe again. Someone laughed. Someone else said, "This is incredible." For the first time in a week, everyone in that room was celebrating. Except the people who arrived 20 minutes later. Sandra rushed through the doorway first. Tears were already running down her face. Oh, Matt. She wrapped her arms around me as carefully as she could. I was so scared. I hugged her back. I know. My voice was weak. Barely a whisper. But inside, I wasn't hugging my wife. I was hugging the woman who had signed a document instructing doctors not to bring me back if my heart stopped. Carl came over next. His smile looked perfect. Almost too perfect. You gave us quite a scare, Dad. I'm sorry, I said. He laughed. Just don't ever do that again. Funny. A week earlier, he'd been discussing what he'd buy after inheriting my money. Now he was acting like the worried son. Eva kissed my forehead. We're so happy you're okay. I smiled. I know you are. Another lie. Adrian waited until everyone else had spoken. Then he stepped forward and shook my hand. His grip was firm. Professional. Welcome back, Matt. It's good to have you with us. Son. Partner. Friend. Every role he had played over the years flashed through my mind. And every one of them suddenly felt fake. Thanks, Adrian. I smiled. I appreciate everything you've done. I've just been keeping the business moving. I'm sure you have. Those 4 words carried more meaning than he realized. The doctor interrupted us. Mr. Harris still needs plenty of rest. Everyone nodded. Sandra squeezed my hand once more. We'll see you tomorrow. As they walked out of the room, I closed my eyes again. Not because I was tired. Because I couldn't bear looking at them anymore. The next morning, the doctor had good news. Your recovery is remarkable. You'll probably be discharged tomorrow. Sandra looked thrilled. Carl volunteered to drive me home. Eva brought flowers. Yellow flowers. She'd forgotten, or never cared, that I hated yellow flowers. I thanked her anyway. I thanked everyone. Every smile I gave them became another piece of my disguise. The drive home was almost surreal. The same streets. The same palm trees. The same neighborhood. Yet everything felt different. When we pulled into the driveway on Creighton Road, Sandra smiled. Home. I looked at the house I'd spent decades paying for. The place where birthdays had been celebrated. Where Christmas mornings had begun. Where dreams had been built. And suddenly, it no longer felt like home. It felt like the headquarters of a conspiracy I hadn't known existed. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it. My chair. My photographs. My books. My coffee mug still sitting beside the kitchen sink. Nothing had changed. Except me. Over the next few days, Sandra became the picture of a devoted wife. She made my meals. Reminded me to take my medication. Asked how I was feeling every few hours. Anyone watching would have called her an angel. But once you've heard someone calmly discuss letting you die, it's impossible to hear their kindness the same way again. About a week later, I announced something at dinner. I don't think I'm ready to go back to work yet. Sandra immediately nodded. Don't rush yourself. Carl agreed. The office is under control. Adrian smiled. Take all the time you need, Matt. Exactly the answer I was hoping for. Because I had no intention of returning to work. Not yet. First, I needed answers. Real answers. The next morning, after Sandra left for the gym, I climbed into my SUV. Instead of driving toward Harris Supply Solutions, I headed in the opposite direction. To a small law office in North Naples. A lawyer I'd never used before. A man my family had never met. His name was Ray Bennett. Before I even sat down, he looked at me and asked. So, Mr. Harris, how can I help you? I looked him straight in the eye. My family thinks I don't know they're planning to steal everything I've built. I need you to help me prove exactly how far they've already gone. Ray didn't look surprised. He simply leaned back in his chair. Folded his hands. And said. Then we'd better start at the beginning. Ray Bennett didn't interrupt me once. He let me tell the whole story. The accident. The coma. The conversations I'd heard. The DNR. Carl talking about his inheritance. Eva complaining about the inconvenience. Adrian saying he knew where everything was. Sandra asking the doctor not to bring me back. When I finally stopped talking, the room was quiet. Ray closed his notebook. Then he asked one simple question. Do you want the truth? Or do you want reassurance? The truth, I answered. No matter what it costs. He gave a slow nod. Then from this moment on, trust no one. He leaned forward. Not your wife. Not your children. Not your employees. If someone has been planning for your death, we assume they've also been planning for your survival. That sentence stayed with me. Planning for my survival. I hadn't even considered that. If there has been fraud, Ray continued, we'll find it. If there hasn't, you'll at least sleep peacefully. I don't think I'll ever sleep peacefully again, I said. For the first time that morning. Ray looked genuinely sorry. The second person I hired was a private investigator. Frank Dolan. He wasn't flashy. No expensive suit. No dramatic introductions. Just a gray sedan, a legal pad, and 20 years of experience reading people. He listened carefully while I repeated everything. When I finished, he remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he asked. How long have you been married? 30 years. He nodded. And before this accident? Did you suspect anything? Nothing. Not once. Frank wrote another note. Sometimes, he said quietly, people don't change overnight. They simply stop hiding. Over the next 2 weeks. Life at home continued as if nothing had happened. Sandra made breakfast every morning. She kissed me goodbye before leaving for the gym. Carl occasionally stopped by pretending to discuss business. Eva called more often than she had in years. Adrian sent polite emails updating me on company operations. If I hadn't heard those conversations in the ICU, I would have believed every single one of them. Instead, I watched. I listened. I noticed things I'd ignored for years. Sandra suddenly protected her phone like it contained state secrets. Carl avoided discussing company finances. Adrian insisted everything at Harris Supply was running perfectly. That bothered me. No business runs perfectly. Especially when its owner has been absent for weeks. 3 Thursdays after my discharge, Ray called. His voice sounded different. Matt. I need you to come to my office. Today. Is something wrong? A pause. I'd rather show you than explain it over the phone. My stomach tightened. The drive to his office felt longer than usual. When I walked inside, a thick folder was waiting on his desk. Ray pushed it toward me. I believe we found your problem. I opened the folder. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Invoices. Corporate account summaries. Pages and pages of financial records. What am I looking at? Ray took a deep breath. For approximately 3 years. Someone has been stealing from Harris Supply Solutions. I stared at him. How much? He slid a spreadsheet across the desk. The total sat at the bottom. $500,000. $500,000. For a moment, I honestly thought there had to be a mistake. No. I shook my head. That can't be right. I wish it weren't. Ray pointed to several highlighted transactions. The money wasn't taken all at once. It was moved slowly. Small amounts. Different dates. Different accounts. Exactly the kind of pattern designed to avoid attracting attention. My chest tightened. Who? Ray didn't answer immediately. Instead, He turned another page. A company registration. Cooper Logistics LLC. The name hit me immediately. Cooper. Adrian's last name. This company, Ray explained, exists only on paper. It has no warehouse. No trucks. No real operations. But it has received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Harris Supply. I felt sick. No. Ray looked me straight in the eye. Your vice president of operations has been creating false vendor invoices. Approving fake payments. And transferring company money into shell accounts. 3 years. For 3 years. The man I'd trusted like a son had been robbing me. Every promotion. Every bonus. Every Christmas bonus I'd personally handed him. None of it had been enough. I sat there staring at the paperwork. Trying to understand how someone I loved could look me in the eye every day. While quietly stealing everything behind my back. Then I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Did he act alone? Ray's expression changed. He slowly turned one final page. Several approval signatures appeared beneath the transactions. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Sandra. My wife. She hadn't just known. She had authorized multiple transfers herself. I closed my eyes. Not because I was emotional. Because something inside me had finally broken. 30 years of marriage. Gone. Not with an argument. Not with a divorce. Not even with the affair I still didn't know about. It ended with ink on financial documents. One signature at a time. Ray quietly closed the folder. I should warn you. This isn't everything. I believe there's more. I looked back at him. What could possibly be worse than this? Ray held my gaze for several seconds. Then he answered. I think they started planning long before your accident. And in that moment, I realized the crash might not have been the beginning of my nightmare. It might have simply been the opportunity they'd been waiting for. Ray let those words hang in the air. I think they started planning long before your accident. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. My mind kept searching for another explanation. Maybe Sandra had signed those documents without reading them. Maybe Adrian had manipulated the paperwork. Maybe there was still something I didn't understand. Ray seemed to know exactly what I was thinking. Hope is a powerful thing, Matt, he said quietly. But evidence doesn't care what we hope. He opened another folder. This is where it gets worse. Inside was a copy of a power of attorney. At first glance, it looked legitimate. My name. My signature. Sandra's signature. Everything appeared normal. Until Ray slid another sheet beside it. Our handwriting expert compared your known signatures with this document. He tapped the bottom of the page. Your signature is forged. I stared at it. It looked like mine. Close enough that I probably would have accepted it if someone had shown it to me in passing. But once Ray pointed out the differences, I couldn't unsee them. The pressure is wrong, he explained. The angle is different. And the final stroke isn't something you ever do. So someone forged my signature. Yes. And they filed this document just after your accident. A chill ran through me. What did they use it for? Ray slid over 2 more documents. Property records. The first one was for our home on Creighton Road. The second was for the Harris Supply Warehouse. My heart sank. Adrian's name had been added as a co-owner. While I was lying unconscious in intensive care. Someone had tried to quietly transfer ownership of my home and my business property. They were moving fast, Ray said. They believed you weren't coming back. I leaned back in my chair. Everything suddenly made sense. I know where everything is. The sentence Adrian had whispered in the hospital wasn't confidence. It was preparation. He already had the paperwork ready. He had simply been waiting for the right moment to use it. Can we reverse this? I asked. Ray nodded. Absolutely. The forgery is obvious once it's examined. We'll file suit. We'll freeze both properties. And the fraudulent deed transfers will be removed. I looked down at the paperwork. When? The sooner, the better. I thought for a long moment. Then I slowly shook my head. Not yet. Ray frowned. If we file now, Adrian will know we've discovered everything. Exactly. I looked out the office window. A memory suddenly surfaced. Sandra smiling across the dinner table a few nights earlier. We should do something special for our anniversary. 30 years of marriage. The entire family would be there. Everyone in one place. An idea began forming. How many days until the anniversary? I asked. Ray checked his calendar. 6. I nodded. We wait. He studied my face. You've got a plan. I do now. If we hold off filing, I continued, Adrian will spend the next 6 days believing he owns half my house. And after the anniversary, he'll learn he doesn't own a thing. For the first time since we'd met. Ray smiled. I'll keep everything ready. The paperwork won't move until you say so. Good. As I stood to leave, he handed me a copy of every document. Keep these somewhere safe. I will. Driving home, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. Not the explosive kind of anger. That had burned itself out. What remained was something colder. Clearer. Every decision now felt simple. Not emotional. Strategic. That evening, I sat on the back porch watching the canal behind the house. The water barely moved. The whole neighborhood felt peaceful. If someone had looked through the window, they would have seen an ordinary man recovering from a terrible accident. Inside, I was quietly rebuilding my entire life. Just then, my phone rang. It was Frank Dolan. I've got something, he said. His voice was unusually serious. You're not going to like it. I closed my eyes. I don't think there's much left that can surprise me. There was a brief silence. Then Frank said 7 words that changed everything all over again. It's about your wife, and another man. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. I simply stared at the canal behind my house while Frank waited on the other end of the line. Finally, I asked the question I never imagined I'd have to ask. How long? Frank answered without hesitation. 14 months. 14 months. The number echoed in my head. More than a year. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was another life. A secret life. Who is he? I asked. His name is Scott Wheeler. 34 years old. Certified personal trainer at Naples Fitness. Frank paused. We've documented regular meetings. Hotels. Restaurants. Afternoons when you were at the office. I closed my eyes. Every late meeting. Every business trip. Every extra hour I'd worked to provide for my family had become an opportunity for someone else to spend time with my wife. I've got photographs, Frank continued. Dates. Locations. Everything you would need in court. I'll send you the full report. The call ended. I didn't move. I sat there listening to the water lap against the seawall. 30 years. 30 years of birthdays. Vacations. Arguments. Forgiveness. Dreams. Promises. I'd always believed marriage wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other every single day. Apparently, Sandra had stopped making that choice a long time ago. I wanted to walk inside and confront her. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. Because emotions make people reckless. Evidence wins cases. That evening, Sandra came home smiling. "How was your day?" "Quiet," I answered. She kissed my cheek. "I stopped by the grocery store. I made your favorite lasagna." I looked at her. The same woman. The same voice. The same smile I'd trusted for 3 decades. Now every word sounded rehearsed. Every gesture felt like part of a performance. We ate dinner together. She talked about neighbors. The weather. Her workout. Normal things. I nodded at the right moments. Smiled when I was supposed to. Inside, I felt nothing. The woman sitting across from me had become a stranger. 2 days later, Frank called again. "I think there's one more person you should talk to." "Who?" "Glenn Ferris." I recognized the name immediately. Glenn had worked in our accounting department for years. Smart. Meticulous. The kind of employee who noticed details everyone else missed. "What about him?" "He tried to report financial irregularities." Frank replied. "Twice. And both times, he was shut down." "By who?" "Carl." That surprised me. "Carl?" Frank continued. "He says Carl wasn't running the fraud. But he protected the people who were." I agreed to meet Glenn the next morning. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Glenn was already there when I arrived. He stood, shook my hand, and looked relieved to see me alive. "I honestly didn't think I'd get this chance," he admitted. "What chance?" "To tell you the truth." We sat down. Neither of us touched our coffee. Glenn reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small flash drive. I started saving copies. Of what? Everything. He slid the drive across the table. I knew something wasn't right. The invoices. The vendor payments. The approvals. I reported them. What happened? Adrian dismissed my concerns. And Carl. Glenn gave a bitter smile. Carl told me to stop asking questions if I wanted to keep my job. I felt my jaw tighten. "So you kept copies?" "I did." He leaned forward. "But that's not the worst part." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" Glenn took a slow breath. "The money wasn't staying with Adrian. It was being distributed." "To who?" He opened a folder. One payment after another. One bank transfer after another. Then he pointed to a familiar business name. Eva's Design Boutique. For a second, I thought I was reading it wrong. "My daughter's business?" Glenn nodded. "Monthly payments. Regular amounts. They weren't salaries. They were kickbacks." I stared at the documents. "No. I wish I were wrong." He lowered his voice. "Eva found out about the fraud almost a year ago. Instead of reporting it, she demanded a share." My heart sank. A share? She threatened to expose everyone unless they paid her. So they did. Every month. Money stolen from my company. Was helping fund my daughter's lifestyle. I couldn't believe it. Not because the evidence was weak. Because it was overwhelming. Sandra. Adrian. Carl. Eva. Every member of my family had made a choice. Some had stolen. Some had covered it up. Some had simply waited for me to die. By the time I drove home that afternoon, The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. I no longer had questions. Only decisions. And 6 days later, on the night of our 30th wedding anniversary, every one of those decisions would come due. By the end of the 4th week, I had everything I needed. Not assumptions. Not suspicions. Proof. Every bank record. Every forged document. Every surveillance photo. Every transfer. Every signature. Every lie. Ray organized the legal evidence into separate files. Frank organized the surveillance reports. Glenn helped reconstruct the financial timeline down to the last dollar. No one knew we were working together. And I intended to keep it that way. One afternoon, Ray looked across his desk and asked, "So, when do you want to file everything?" I thought about it for a moment. If we file today, they'll panic. They'll start making excuses. They'll hire lawyers. They'll destroy relationships before they destroy evidence. Ray nodded. "So what's your plan?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "My anniversary." He leaned back. "The party?" "Exactly. They've already planned it. They expect me to stand there. Thank everyone for supporting me. Cut a cake. And celebrate 30 years of marriage." I shook my head. "No. I'm going to let them celebrate. And then, I'm going to tell the truth." Ray was silent. Finally, he asked. "In front of everyone? Every single person? The neighbors? The friends? Our pastor? My family? No private conversations? No closed doors? They've been performing for years. It's time they perform in front of an audience." A slow smile crossed Ray's face. "I'll have everything ready." The next morning, I visited the bank. Sandra had never paid much attention to our investment accounts. She always assumed I handled those things. She was right. Over the years, I deposited my corporate distributions into a separate account. Money that legally belonged to me. Not the business. Not our joint household account. Mine. I transferred every dollar into a brand new individual account at another bank. Completely legal. Completely documented. By the time I walked out of the branch, Sandra no longer had access to a single cent of it. That afternoon, I returned to Ray's office. "There's one more thing," I said. "My will." He opened the old copy. "You've been generous. I know. My family always came first. And now?" I looked out the window. "They've made it very clear that I don't." Ray drafted a new will. It wasn't written out of anger. It was written out of clarity. The charitable foundation my late mother had always dreamed about became the primary beneficiary. Long-time employees who had stayed loyal were remembered. Scholarship funds were created. Carl, Eva, Sandra. Each would receive exactly $1,000. Just enough to prove they hadn't been forgotten. Just enough to remind them that choices have consequences. When I signed the final page, it felt strangely peaceful. Not satisfying. Peaceful. Like closing a book I'd been trying to finish for years. Meanwhile, life at home continued exactly as before. Sandra happily discussed flower arrangements for the anniversary. She asked which caterer I preferred. I told her to choose the best one. "We're only celebrating 30 years once," I said. She smiled. "I knew you'd say that." Carl stopped by one evening carrying a bottle of bourbon. Thought we could celebrate early. We sat on the back patio. He talked about golf. Vacation plans. A new SUV he'd been thinking about buying. I couldn't help wondering. Had he already mentally spent the inheritance? Eva called 2 days later. "Dad, I can't wait for Saturday. It'll be so nice having everyone together again." "It really will," I replied. She had no idea how true those words were. Even Adrian seemed unusually relaxed. At the office, he continued acting as though he already owned part of the company. He had no reason to think otherwise. As far as he knew, the forged property documents had worked. The missing money remained undiscovered.